Okay, welcome to the fourth meeting of the President's Export Council. We, like always, we have a lot of material, so let's get started. Listen, last week we made a lot of progress, and that's last week. And even prior to last week, we made a lot of progress on a number of fronts. But APEC, and I think Mike Froman later in the morning is going to give us an update on that meeting. Everything from FTAs to trade agreements to related things. A lot's going on out there. I also want to thank Rob Hendrickson and now Ambassador Bobby Mandel for their service to the Council. Rob is stepping down at the end of the year, and last month the Senate confirmed Bobby to be the U.S. Ambassador to Luxembourg. They have both made valuable contributions to the Council, as all of us remember, and they will be missed. Now, let's welcome my old friend Bill Daley, White House Chief of Staff, who will introduce our newest member, Commerce Secretary John Bryson.
Thanks, Jim. Old friend. Yeah, that's a good point.
One of us is old, Bill.
I look around, there's a lot of us. Anyways, let me thank Jim, and let me, once again, on behalf of the President, thank all of the members of the PEC for the time you take out of your busy schedules from your businesses, from your lives to help this country, help the economy, and to really spend time to give advice to us. And I thank all of the members of the cabinet and the administrators that are here and all of the administration people who are here with you today. Obviously, a lot has happened. First, let me thank you all. A lot of very positive things have happened lately. The 3 trade agreements and TAA that was passed. I thank so many of the people in this room who worked awfully hard for those to be passed. Took a long time, a lot longer than any of us wanted. But I think in the end, we're very pleased. It is going to increase jobs in this country. It's going to strengthen our relationship with allies that have been strong friends of the United States, and give opportunities to American workers that have not been there. So we thank you for the work, and everyone in this room really, I know, spent a lot of time on it, and especially Jim as chairman of this group, really spent a lot of time on it. So I thank you all for that. I know Froman is going to give an update on APEC. Let me just say your chairman did a wonderful imitation of Charlie Rose as he interviewed the president, and I think the APEC meeting was very successful. There is a strong desire by the president to focus and continue to strengthen the focus on Asia and the opportunities for engagement with friends throughout Asia. And I think the feeling at that meeting was very much positive about the U.S. engagement over the next number of years in Asia and the opportunities that present themselves there for U.S. businesses and for export growth. So I thank you, Jim, for that interview. I think the President did a great job of pointing out the opportunities that are there for us and the need for us to get more competitive here in this country and therefore be more competitive around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce a new member of the administration, someone that I've known for a while. Extremely successful in business, someone who has sacrificed, as many people do, to go into government. Took a lot longer to get his confirmation done than any of us would have wanted, but it is the times we live in this town that everything seems to take a little longer than the American people would like, and surely on things that we as administration would like to get done. But it got done, and so we're extremely proud of John's hit the ground running at APEC last week, and he's leaving, I know, today after this meeting for China for the JCCT with a number of other colleagues from the administration. So as I introduced John the day he, after he was confirmed by the Senate, I said he has the opportunity to be the second greatest Commerce Secretary in the history of the country. So I hope he takes advantage of that opportunity. So let me introduce to you John Bryson. John?
Well, really I'm honored to be introduced by Bill We actually spent a lot of time together out at APEC, but a lot of time in every previous step along the way, and he did everything he could to move my confirmation along. Just that I was a tough case.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's such a pleasure to work with Bill and work with the members of this administration, many of whom are around the table. So I'm now 3 weeks into the job, so I'm really way into this. This is the fourth meeting. It's my first, but I'm really delighted to be with you. I think what you're doing makes a difference. It makes a huge difference, and I've been able to go through the letters of recommendations you're making, and they're practical and they're sound and the kinds of things that are based on what business people can offer, including a sense of urgency, including a really highly specific means of keeping track of what we're doing here, and I commend that a lot. Leaders of the business community and the labor community together, I think, are bringing in valuable insights. I'm very pleased that members of Congress are with us here as well, and I'd simply say that I and we count on your advice, and that's vitally important to us. I'm going to talk a little about exports, but I'm not going to go very far into what I might say because you know so much about it all already. Reality, as I say, from the day I've arrived at the Commerce Department, that we have a fragile economy in this country. It's moved forward some, but what we have beyond that is a jobs crisis. I mean, the levels of unemployment are really, really, really low. And notwithstanding the fact we have now 20 weeks in a row of improved jobs reports, and we were actually delighted. We're out at APEC, and we got the report on September. You know, it was a meaningful step up. Still way too little relative to what we need to have. And I've talked a lot. Some of you, we were talking around breakfast this morning, what this means for older people, for middle-aged people, but particularly for the young people that are potentially entering the workforce now and don't find anything, and what that does for the disciplines they need to have, but also their sense of opportunity in this country is something we've got deeply to address. So that's going to be kind of the heart of my highest priority. It's really the President's highest priority, sets it out extremely well. And I think all of you understand that what exports mean is opportunities for U.S.-based businesses to provide more jobs, right? Exports provide revenues. They require that we come forth with the products we can best provide, and jobs follow that. So that's incredibly important, and that's true across not just, of course, the larger businesses in our country, but the small and the medium-sized businesses, and I've been meeting with a lot of those. And there, that's an area in which the financing and support of them is not so great. You know, those that have very prominent and high-stature credit, as usual, they can get financing and financing at favorable terms, but the little guys, not so much. And for example, the manufacturing base among the little guys in this country is extraordinary. Really talented people with drive, and they're looking all the time, but they don't know so much about the export world. So as you know, probably heard these figures, what is it, something like 98% of the businesses in the country don't export at all, and then even among those that do, the fraction that go only to one country is very, very high. So this is an opportunity in the waiting. We can really do something about it. And the kinds of practical recommendations you're making in these meetings are really the core of learning. So mostly what I'm going to do is listen today, and I could take you through the statistics here, and the statistics are stunning, on how we've come under the President's initiative. You've played a big role in that. You know that. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we took any kind of complacency with respect to our ability to hit the full doubling target. So what, for example, about the European financial crisis now, and how might that affect our exports? And obviously, exports to Western Europe, even to Eastern Europe, have been a big part of our export scheme, and you have to believe there are going to be some impacts there and plenty of others. We've talked about APEC. Mike Froman will come in on talk about that, and he'll present it very, very well. Gene Sperling, I suspect you're going to talk a little about that as well. This was my first participation in APEC, and what only stands out, I would say, is the strength with which this administration is addressing opportunities for businesses in our country, balancing the playing field, advocating what U.S. businesses best offer, working hard with the themes of innovation, of creation, of entrepreneurship, but also just plain really capable people who keep finding niches. And it was exciting for me to be a part of this, and I had the opportunity to do many of my own meetings one-on-one with the countries around the world, with our commerce team there, and then I had the final day with the president going through these critical meetings. And we are hitting it as hard, and with the president's leadership, I think very effectively about the kinds of things we need to do to take that further. I'm just going to stop there. I could give you statistics, you know them all, but mainly what I want to say is a big, big thanks to all of you for your support on the free trade agreements, your support in this area, and I appreciate your giving your time to those of us in the federal government on this exports issue. Thank you very much.
John, thank you. Thank you very much for both for the encouragement and the leadership. That's what really gets us up in the morning, and for recognition of some of the success that some of my colleagues have had in leading these initiatives. You mentioned the small business one, and I was just looking at Fred, Chairman Hochberg over there, and the Small Business Supplier Financing Initiative, which is a first big step in the direction you're encouraging, John, that just has rolled out, and we see it and are already working it with banks and with our supply base, and so you'll probably mention that a little bit later, but I acknowledge that. Ursula, do you have any comments before we charge ahead?
Just short, welcome, Secretary Bryson. It's good to have you on board. You do have big shoes to fill. We've made a lot of progress, and I look forward to just making more with you at our side. So thank you for coming on board.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ursula. I think it's important to point out at this point, and believe it or not, we've been at this for 18 months, to look at where we are on implementing our first 15 letters of recommendations. Our output are letters to the president after working with you to make sure the wording is right and the recommendations make sense. And we actually went through a discussion at our last meeting where a few of the members said, hey, should we stop and look where we are and give ourselves a sense of completion of implementation, challenges yet in front of us against a number of the major areas. And the PEC staff has prepared a stoplight chart, which will help us briefly review the progress. I'll highlight a few, and then I'll turn to other members to perhaps make some comments. The best news I can report is that Ursula, Pat, Jim, and I did witness the historic signings of the FTAs with Korea, Colombia, and Panama last month. And so that recommendation is solid green, thanks to the leadership at the cabinet level here. On export control reform, I'm pleased to report that the administration has continued to make progress. I think we have a real opportunity here. After living through many, many years of not much progress there, I think Secretary Gates' initial initiative was very welcome, and we, in a meeting with Secretary Panetta yesterday, a subset of this group, very pleased to see his commitment to push through with your team, John, and with State to follow through on those recommendations. It did publish a draft rule for Category 8, rationalizing the controls on aircraft and aircraft parts and components. A great place to start, as far as I'm concerned. So on XM, bills are ready for floor action and in the House and Senate next year with the administration's support. I think we're at a level that can support the exports, but it's not done yet, but we're all in, and we're going to try to engage everybody to help Chairman Hochberg get there. And on tax reform, there is a lot of work going on, but it's a little early to predict what's happening. I mean, it's all caught up in the budget thing. So, before I ask Secretary Bryson to make some comments and Chairman Hochberg, I know Gene is really on a tight schedule. And so if I could just insert sort of as a sidebar here, because Gene Sperling, we're fortunate to have him with us, and some comments from you as we're moving through this would really be appreciated. And then we'll come back to the stoplight chart.
I will be brief for two reasons. One, you don't need more intro remarks, and two, I actually have to go run a meeting that deals with some of the issues you were just raising. So in the furtherance of this, we are obviously in the point where we are getting ready for our next budget and next State of the Union. I'll make 4 points pretty quickly. One is that, as you've seen, trade, as difficult as it is, does tend to, if you keep your head down, you can overperform political expectations. And Bill and I and Lael and others remember 99 and 2000 when it was supposed to be complete lame duck, done, ended up being an enormously successful year in terms of China WTO, in terms of the Africa trade agreement, other things. Here, 2011, one of the most divisive years probably, and most weak economic, probably the worst combination of political divisiveness and a bad economy that you've seen, and yet it's going to, when the new year comes, 2011 will have been quite a successful year on trade. We're still pushing on TPP, still pushing on Jackson-Vanik, but it does show me that you can overperform in this area just by moving the ball forward. You do have the opportunity for bipartisanship here that you don't always have. So for all the difficulties, I think this is a good lesson, and I know a lot of people will kind of do the discounting for 2012, and I would just say don't listen. Just keep, head down, just keep going forward. You never know how the environment changes. You never know when people decide they want to show accomplishment, get something done. So I've seen this before. You can overperform political expectations on trade and exports. We're enormously committed here. You can see that from our Chief of Staff. You can see that from the efforts Mike Froman puts in, but also just from the depth of the economic team from John Bryson and Secretary Solis and Karen Mills and others. Secondly, in light of that, the focus on exports, particularly because of the jobs focus, becomes that much more important. This is the part that is the part, the only part the public can really understand. That may be unfortunate that they can't understand fully the benefits of more competition from imports and lower prices and innovation. Those things are all true. They're very difficult to explain. It is the exports that is our chance to kind of communicate to the average person that this is about more jobs. Third point I'd make goes something Bill was saying, which is that the role that you play on the broader pragmatism is so important right now. And what happened on trade adjustment assistance and the FTAs is just a perfect example of that. That was the only way you were going to get the consensus for this to pass. And you have a lot of people who just wanted to rail against the free trade agreements. You had a lot of people who wanted them and didn't want to do anything for workers. And I think the business community played an awfully important role in kind of breaking through the politics and saying, yes, you can be for free trade agreements and helping workers. And I think it's worth thinking of that in a broader sense, too. The more I think the people who are pushing the export agenda are part of the workforce agenda, the more, again, you're paving ground for that bipartisan consensus that goes beyond the politics, and I think paves room for more possibilities of that rare bipartisan legislative achievement. Obviously, the other thing you've seen from us is legislative achievements are difficult, so we do wake up every morning, and this is in Bill's White House now. What we can do without Congress is just a part of our day, every single day, and so there's a greater focus. There's always focus there, but there's a greater energy and focus that Bill's instilled. And, you just find there is more you can do, and I think this is another place where if you can say, I mean, here's something you can do on the custom side. Here's something that could be make a big difference. This could break through. Maybe in 2009 with the world crashing, that wouldn't have got focused, but I think right now we are giving the focus to those type of things. So in terms of your recommendations, Jim, there is a lot more attention and focus now on the executive action. And then the final thing I just say, and I'm not trying to do an advertisement for the American Jobs Act, I'm really not, for a particular package, but we've got to be focused on growth. I mean, you guys have seen the European numbers. They're just terrible. For even beyond the crisis, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands, either zero or contractionary in the third quarter. And that's besides the overall risk of crisis there. Our blue chip projections are 2% growth, 2.1, 2.2. That is not even enough to bring the unemployment rate down. And the idea, and people are not going to support all the things we're trying to do unless they see that connection. And even if a particular company can get by, I promise you this, our crisis of long-term unemployment will get worse and worse at 2% growth. Right now, we are amidst the worst long-term unemployment crisis in our lifetimes. In the deep recession of 1981-82, the average length of unemployment was 21 weeks. The average length today is 40 weeks. If you have 2% growth, people can just hire a little bit, take the most attractive candidates. They do not reach to the people who have been out of work a year, year and a half, 2 years. And that means that what is basically a demand and temporary unemployment issue will start to feed into the structural issue as people become unemployed. We all know, unemployed for 5, 6 months, terrible pain and inconvenience. Unemployed for a year and a half, you lose your house. Sadly, people often lose their spouse. They lose their health. They become more and more disconnected. So we've got to get the growth going in the next year, year and a half. It's just essential. It's essential for an export agenda, but I think it's essential generally, and I think that just has to be part of everyone's agenda. And with that, I have to run, but thank you very much.
Gene, thank you very much. You know, it's the focus on execution and the evidence thereof is really motivational for us, so we really appreciate the comments. Okay. John, did you have any comments as we're sort of halfway through the stoplight chart? Do you want to?
Yeah, the free trade agreements, well, let me just say, as Gene walks out, covering the entire national economy, head of the National Economic Council, he is tireless, he's done it before, and he covers it spectacularly well, and he provides insight and leadership for all of us, so he makes a difference. So on the charts, the free trade agreement, I'm going to only say a couple of things. First, thanks to all of you. I mean, we wouldn't have these free trade agreements without engagement, both on the part of business and labor. That's a big thing. A couple of things, there's a lot of follow-up here. So you see the charts, but there's a lot of follow-up to get this done, and I'll just touch on a few things. We need to talk to business people. We need to reach out, actually, particularly to the smaller and medium size, because the larger business will understand largely how to take advantage of these opportunities. So a big education program to make a reality and a near-term reality of benefits of these agreements, that's number one. I think there'll be more talk about that later on. At the same time, we have the responsibility, particularly at the Commerce Department, to see to it that the terms, the mandatory terms of compliance with these agreements really are enforced and monitored. So all active trade agreements, we have to see it to it that the private sector, the business people of our country, and the workers, the employees, really get what is promised with these free trade agreements. And that's not an automatic. That takes a lot of follow-through. And finally, let me just say, in addition to working with the business community, at the Commerce Department, I am working a lot with the U.S. Trade Representative, Department of State, Agriculture, Treasury, and others, identifying as early as we can any emerging commercial concerns. So, we know that there will be things that arise that we hadn't foreseen. We want your feedback really promptly on that, and we'll work together on those solutions. So I'll stop there, but thanks.
Okay. Thank you, John. Chairman Hochberg, did you want to add something here?
Thank you. I will just add, yes, we are waiting for our reauthorization to go through. We President has asked for $140 billion for a cap of our portfolio. We're already in the 90s. Our current cap is $100 billion, so we definitely need to get this done if we're going to keep financing exports. Just to round up, we completed our year 4 weeks ago. I think, like Karen, we had a record year. Exim Bank is up over 100% from when President Obama was elected. We did about $33 billion worth of loans and guarantees and insurance, which generates approximately 290,000 jobs. And about $6 billion of that, also a record for us, was small business. As Jim mentioned, we have a program called Supply Chain Finance, where we indirect exporters are those who are supplying companies like Boeing, Caterpillar, Case New Holland are the first three. Mary and I have talked about whether that could work for Vermeer. Also working with Ford to help them do more exports out of the plant in Chicago. And yesterday, just to give an example, I was on the phone with Oshkosh, Charlie Sues, who's the CEO. We're helping them bid on a fire and rescue for Indonesia, and it's not a lot, but it will add 15 employees for a year to just get this $20-odd million contract. And so, the 290,000 is like a telephone number. 15 employees in Oshkosh, Wisconsin is a real number. That's 15 families that have an income and pick up with jeans that stay in their house, keep their kids in school, and that's just one of many transactions. So, but our focus now is making sure we get reauthorized, and reauthorized at the right number.
You've got a lot of people around the table helping us, so we'll keep
Good.
pushing.
My comments are mostly on infrastructure, which we'll talk about later when Secretary LaHood is here, so that's fine.
I have 4 to go through. First is veterans trainings programs. The PEC has recommended that an enhanced focus on veterans training could address the problems that veterans are facing as they transition back to civilian workforce, while also addressing some serious skill shortages that many companies have. The Veterans Employment and Training Services, VETS, has been working to launch new initiatives that assist veterans in finding work as part of a broader White House strategy outlined in the Strengthening Our Military Families report. These steps represent positive progress, but more has to be done. More could be done, more has to be done to ensure that these programs match up with our returning vets. We'll continue to work on that effort. And work should also be done to make sure that our veterans are aware of and give them access to necessary STEM training, science, technology, engineering, and math training and education, so that they are more ready to fill these posts. I look forward to our continuing work on this, and want to continue to work with the administration to bolster these important programs. And I'd like to now turn it over to Secretary Solis to see if she has any comments on this.
Thank you. I'm very excited about the opportunity to be engaged in this effort. It's something that we have a very high priority in our administration and, of course, our agency. One of the things that we created recently was a Gold Card standard. It's a card that's available to veterans that are leaving the military, and it's distributed through the TAPS program. And what it will do is allow for individuals that everyone will qualify as soon as they are exiting, but before they leave, they'll understand that they'll have a commitment from the Department of Labor for 6 months of intensive services that they will be able to receive at our one-stop centers. And I think some of you know that we have about 3,000 of these centers, and they're out there, and they'll provide coaching, resume writing, advice, training assistance, and actually give them an availability to get service from other components of our one-stop. So if it's to start a new job or to get other kinds of wraparound services, that will be made available. So that's a Gold Card standard. They'll be available for the 6 months intensive period. The next thing I'd like to say is that we created also a tool that's called My Next Move for veterans. We've already used some of this information to help dislocated workers and people that are in the unemployment area now, but now we're actually tailoring it to veterans so that they can then, before they even leave service, can draw down information about what occupations and skill sets are better matched with employers. So we're going an extra mile mile to do that, and it's tailor-made for veterans, something that's very easy to access. And then we're also working with our other sister agencies to create a Veterans Job Bank where over 500,000 listings and postings will be available, and we hope to get that up and get more corporations and companies involved. So that's going to be available. Something that I did want to mention that we're doing with Microsoft that's new is that they have identified 5 areas in the country where they want to actually make investments and help provide training for individuals to be exposed to, IT, to Microsoft, and understand how to use that. You'd be surprised how many young vets that are faced with coming back home and haven't had any higher education or training whatsoever. So they are going to make an investment and begin that the coming year. So we're hoping to see that expand, and that's something that's nice that corporations are stepping up to the plate to make that available for our veterans. I don't think I have to reiterate how important it is that the younger vets that are coming home post 9/11 are the ones that are faced with anywhere from 12% and higher unemployment. And they're coming home literally faced with many challenges. And one initiative also that just to keep in mind is we're expanding our Job Corps programs that are currently available to allow for slots to be made open for them as well. It's a disciplined, very structured environment. It's almost as though you're living on a college campus, and in many ways it helps to provide them with that kind of structured discipline that they need. But we certainly would like to see more opportunities available for apprenticeship training and programs to also be a part of their reentry and reintegration back into the workforce. So I'm excited and want to continue to expand and hear about any ideas that you may have, how we can make improvements in this area. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We had an outstanding meeting yesterday with Secretary Panetta and spoke about this topic in a fair amount of detail, and I'm pleased to say that he is as committed and as engaged as Secretary Gates was in this effort. So we are looking forward to continued progress here and continued good progress here. Next topic is on services data. Data on services exports, as most of you know, we've talked about this before, is much more limited than the substantial data that we have on government, that the government collects and analyzes on other goods exported. The PEC recommended that the U.S. government improve the quality of export data for the U.S. services sector, including through increasing funding to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, and improvement in data sharing among key agencies like the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Progress has been made. The BEA is attempting to reallocate funding within its existing budget to strengthen services data collection and analysis, and we also need to thank Senator Wyden and Congressman Weichert. Thank you very much. Both members of the PEC for shepherding this legislation that would permit the data sharing that the PEC recommended. The legislation is a significant step forward. Xerox Corporation is a major services provider around the world, and the collection of this data is important for our company as well. Next steps will involve increased private sector engagement. The BEA and others will reach out to companies to see if they can provide relevant services, data, and to solicit their input on data improvement priorities. The next step will involve further implementation of these actions to begin providing the enhanced data. I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Reichert, who's here to comment on it, if you can, please.
Thank you, Ursula, and again, it's a pleasure to be here. And I've been to all of the Export Council meetings. Haven't missed one yet, so I'm very pleased to be a part of this effort. And I share the frustration that Jean was sharing earlier, and the sometimes lack of progress and bipartisanship in Congress, not only on the House side but on the Senate side. But I would like to, before I comment on the services issue, I would like to say that I too share the excitement around the trade agreement success. I think does show some bipartisan, the opportunity and a hopeful attitude that we can make some progress, even though, as Bill said, it wasn't the easiest thing to get done. Some members came dragging and kicking, but we got them there. And a great historical success, I think, in those 3 trade agreements. Washington State especially excited about the Korean agreement and the opportunities there for aerospace and the services industry. Just to touch briefly on the bipartisanship issue, at a local level, it sometimes works. So I wanted to share this story briefly. Adam Smith and I, a Democrat from Washington State, are hosting a jobs fair, which we're calling Hire America, helping identify real employment in America. We have over 75 vendors. These are vendors who have come forward. Boeing is one participant who have come forward and said, we are hiring people. So these just aren't businesses showing up to be there, but they're actually in the process of hiring people. They have jobs. So we are expecting thousands of people to come to this bipartisan fair, and it's going to be happening next week. So we're excited about that. Hope to duplicate that across the country and create some excitement around finding those jobs, but also creating some degree of hopefulness for those who see Congress, members of Congress, not working together, but we can shake hands sometimes. So on the issue of services, I think it's really important for me to be here and listen to the dialogue that is the exchange here that takes place, the information that you provide us. The legislation, of course, is fashioned after that discussion and after the dialogue and the information that you give us. But you know, an old sheriff, hostage negotiator, homicide detective, and SWAT commander, I like to see things get done, Jim. And so we are going to push this thing. We're not going to rest until we get it done. That's my commitment to this issue. And I know it's not going to be easy, but with everybody in this room working together, we can get this through. And as you know, some of the concerns that have been mentioned. Privacy is one of those around the services area, but it really is an area where we have a great advantage across this country in making great strides and success in creating jobs, protecting jobs, and I think that the comments made around the table today regarding education of the public and their maybe lack of knowledge so thus far. Anyway, as to our trade agreements and our friendships and partnerships with those countries around the world is really an effort that is sometimes undervalued, underestimated. It is one that needs to take place to change the sort of culture in America where trading and doing business with other countries is really a bad thing. We need to convince people it's a good thing. It is a job creator, and you know, the bottom line is sell American. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
It has not gone unnoticed. It's not gone unnoticed that you have been at every meeting, so thank you for your tenacity and your
Appreciate it.
dedication in
Thank
pushing
you.
this. Thank you, Congressman Reichert. Next area is on intellectual property rights. The PEC has made a number of recommendations designed to improve IPR enforcement and strengthen legal standards of IPR protection in foreign markets. Strengthening IPR overseas is clearly a critical priority. It is also a long-term effort, one that is made progress, especially given its starting point, the starting point of many of our trading partners. The U.S. government has made good progress in implementing many of the PEC's recommendations in this area, particularly with respect to improving U.S. strategy and coordination across the agencies. Many federal agencies collaborated to assist the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordination, or IPEC, in the formulation of the Joint Strategic Plan on Intellectual Property Enforcement. Work continues to better coordinate the work of IP attachés overseas with embassies and agencies in Washington. We can all agree that strengthening IP overseas will be a long-term effort. The steps that have been taken will strengthen the U.S. coordination and our strategy. And in the next steps will require continued implementation of these strategies to improve IP rights around the world. A long way to go, a good start, and we'll keep focused on this area for sure. The last area is on business visas, another long-standing issue. And during the PEC's most recent meeting in March of this year, we recommended that the U.S. government address the many serious issues with respect to visa policies and processing that hampers U.S. companies' ability to do business globally. As we noted, business visas play a vital role in connecting U.S. companies with suppliers, customers, and even potential investors. Progress on these recommendations has been much more limited than in other areas that we'll discuss today. The Interdepartmental Working Group on Business-Related Visas has addressed business-related visa application problems, as they have arisen on a case-by-case basis. The existence of this working group and their efforts are a positive first step. However, much more needs to be done, much more needs to be done more rapidly to make a more significant and systemic change in the way that the United States implements and processes business visas. I am hopeful that the government will have the opportunity to make additional progress on this critical priority before our next meeting. And I'd like to put the Secretary on the spot a bit and turn it over to Secretary Bryson for his comments.
Well, this is a big deal. We hear a lot about it from businesses, and it's pretty obvious. We can't be a genuine trade country, really open to trade and encouraging of trade, if in the aftermath, for example, of 9/11, kind of restrictions and concerns that arose, we have to overcome those. Legitimate business travelers have to be able to get here. And as Ursula said, it can't be just on a one-at-a-time basis. So we're putting a big priority on it. Obviously, if these people can't get here, they can't buy our goods, they can't invest in our economy, they can't spin off and go into our tourist attractions and so on. I think special credit right now is actually due to Secretary of State Clinton and the Department of State. They're really moving on this. Of course, we've talked with them a lot because this ties so much into the things that we at the Commerce Department need to do. But I'm really delighted by the steps that are actually being taken now. For example, notably most recently, in a considerable movement of people in the visa areas for Brazil and for China. There's a lot yet to be done, however.
Thank you, Secretary. I'd like to turn it over to Scott Davis so that he can comment on trade facilitation and the single window and benchmarking.
Thanks, Ursula. Many countries around the globe have shown great export growth over the last decade. So as a group, we decided to ask the administration, the Commerce Department, to go out and benchmark several of these countries. Per the recommendation, the Department of Commerce conducted a comprehensive study of 7 top exporting countries, including Canada, Germany, UK, India, Australia, Sweden, and Brazil. Now, we have not yet, the results are being compiled. We have not seen the results as of yet, but I'm expecting that quite soon. In conjunction with this, the Commerce Department also benchmarked several websites of foreign countries, UK, Canada, and Australia. And some of those good websites, I think, helped us revamp the export.gov website, which I had a chance to look at last week and was quite impressed. So if any of you get a chance to look at the website, export.gov, it's a great tool for small and medium-sized enterprises to get into the exporting business. So take a look. I'm not sure if anybody in the Commerce Department's had a sneak peek at the compilations yet. If they do, comment. Free to comment.
Any comments on benchmarking?
But just real quickly, yeah, there's been a kind of initial look at a little bit of the findings. I'll just pick out one thing that quite struck our people, and that is a number of countries use their local chambers of commerce. We'd call it the local chamber of commerce. And at those local chambers of commerce, they are taking the initiative in their immediate communities to train young people for the jobs that are most attractive and available. So they're catching it early. They're doing it in ways that doesn't cost the local people, those that can't perhaps afford it, to have this extraordinary kind of training. And so that struck us. We want to get this fully done. We will get it done quickly, and we'll get the reports back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Is Dick Freeman here? Yeah, Dick, there you are. Report on tourism, travel, a big deal.
So is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
One of the first letters that we wrote was about tourism and travel. I think there's been some substantial progress. That's good progress on this issue. Let me just quickly tell you, hotel occupancy in the United States just overall is up about 4% to 60%. Revenue is actually up about 8%, but in the luxury and upscale stuff, it's up 8 to 10%, which is a very, very healthy number because most of the foreigners stay in upper scale properties. We've made. If we were able to get back to our traditional share of the world market, it'd be almost 1.3 million jobs and 800 to 900 billion dollars in revenue. And my own view is that this could be done in a couple years. This is not something this is a relatively easy thing, given the complexities of lots of other things that we work on. I want to report that the Brand USA promotion has just launched itself in the last week or two at the World Travel Mart. That's the Travel Promotion Act. We now have money to advertise this country. 65% of the people who come to the United States come from visa-waived countries. We've got to add more countries to the visa-waived program. The people are working on that. In my view, not quite fast enough, but there's potential to add Taiwan, Poland, Chile, a few other countries to the visa-waived program, which would be very helpful. In China, there has been enormous, in China, India, and Brazil, there's been enormous progress. Undersecretary Tom Nides has done a fabulous job, in my view. In China, the wait times have gone down from 120 days to 20 days, plus a 50% increase in the number, so that the Chinese visas have gone from 500,000 in 2009 up to 1.2 million this year. Very, very substantial progress, and those people spend money. India, wait times for visas down to 20 days. Brazil is still a bad situation, but it's dropped in half from 145 to like 80 or something days. The way they've done this is a model, I think, because they make money in the State Department on visas. The way they've done it is pretty simple. They add more windows, they add more shifts, they add more people, and they process more. And those people come, and they want to come. I just would say one other thing. You know, this is a big deal, as you said, Mr. Chairman. You know, in the long-haul travel business, China's travel over the last 10 years up 120, outbound travel from China, 126%. India, 124%. We're 2%. Yeah. So we've just lost a huge window, and we can pick it up, I think, easily. I just want to also say that there are 7 legislative proposals in Congress. Senator Klobuchar has one. There's quite a number. So if we push those things, this is a really resolvable issue if we get Homeland Security, Commerce, and State to work together. But I think there has been progress, and I think there is a sort of focus on this, and I think it's pretty good news.
Thanks for your report, Dick. Appreciate it very much. Gene, do you have a comment on SME, and maybe Administrator Mills could comment afterwards?
I do. Thank you, and welcome aboard again, Mr. Secretary. First, let me say thanks to Secretary Solis for hosting the SME at her office a few months back. Also had meetings with Administrator Mills, and they hosted us in terms of describing all the programs that were available to the community. And so here with the SME committee, what we've done so far, we've held 5 roundtables across the country and in the most high export cities. And we identified the challenges, one being education, the lack of education, I should say, about these different programs. The other is always the issue of lack of access to capital, the cost burdens as relates to regulatory issues, and misconceptions about FTAs. This basically resulted in the recommendations to begin what we call the regional export initiatives. And the purpose of that is to coalesce the local business and private sectors and communities and universities to focus on minorities in those communities on the ground to actually do the outreach, as opposed to having the SBA and the Department of Commerce to do that. Brookings has taken the lead on promoting another issue, which is called the Metro Export Initiatives, and they've done that in 4 cities. I believe that even though we're in a tight budget environment, I believe that the Department of Commerce ran out of green ink when we got down to looking at the chart here, because they have it yellow. And I think if you looked at the SME trade capacity export assistance, you will see that the SBA has been very, very busy promoting their program. So, Mike, if you ran out of ink, let us know. We'll get you some green the next time. But those are very, very important issues that they put out there. But we like to say that with the STEP program, we believe that the next round of STEP funding should go beyond just awarding the money to the states, but get it down into the metros and the regions, so they can have a situation where they can compete and get the boots on the ground from the minority community. And lastly, I had a meeting with, I've had 2 meetings with Secretary LaHood, and I made some recommendations to him and he agreed with. Basically, we're talking about just simple changes in DOT policies that will create substantial subcontracting opportunities for small businesses, thus creating a substantial number of jobs. So we're looking forward to him implementing those procedures in the very near future, and we certainly believe that in our next meeting, we will have some substantial information to report. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, good.
When you want me to.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. And I want to add my thanks to all of you for the passage of the free trade agreements and to Ron Kirk. You know, this, as I travel all around the country, I meet small businesses. I was in Miami and I met a small business who was immediately going to implement on the Colombia Free Trade Agreement that he already exports environmentally safe cleaning products to Latin America. He's a Hispanic-owned business, and this is just, you know, opening up another market, giving him a level playing field. It's particularly true also in Korea, and it's true in Korea because we're going to be able to have small businesses sell into the Korean government procurement operations, which is actually a huge opportunity. John, you mentioned capital. So we are highly focused on capital. As Fred said, we had a record year in SBA loan guarantees, $30 billion, the biggest year ever in SBA history, and exports, loans to exporters was up 40%. So we have made an enormous effort, both with new products and with our current outreach, to educate small businesses that these are demand opportunities for them. And this will be an ongoing effort for quite some time because the potential is absolutely huge. One of the things that we are doing is looking at businesses in export supply chains. And with Fred's product, we've just introduced a product called Cap Lines. It's a revision of a current product under the President's theme of let's not wait, let's see what we can do in our current authority. Let's take a current product, let's take the paperwork from this much down to this much. And this is an asset-based loan. If any of you have ever had one, you know there can be a lot of paperwork. And now this is available for your supply chain to take that next order that you want to put down to them to either export directly to your plant overseas or to export or to give it to you so that you can export more effectively. I want to introduce Dario Gomez, who's here, who's the head, our new head of Small Business International Trade. The reason that this is so important is in the Small Business Jobs Act, which was passed a year ago, we were asked to elevate our trade activities. And we were very happy to do that and to be given the funding of $60 million for STEP grants. And what Dario oversees among all of our other efforts is a new program where this year we just awarded 47 states money to do what all of you have been out in the small business world know is important, to have a focused effort at the state level on helping small businesses get the expertise, get the capital, get the business opportunities to export. And we did it as a competition, which all of you will appreciate. And that really upped the stakes. And actually, I'm surprised the intention was to give some money to as many folks as possible, particularly the small states who export. And that was written in the legislation. We were able to do that, so 47 states and 3 territories. We are about to start a next round of these. And one of the great suggestions we've had is to work with mayors as well as states, because sometimes the mayors are driving even more these small business-centered export activities, and they need to be linked, leveraged, and aligned with all of the community-based lending, all of the skill building that we're working very hard with Secretary Solis on, in order to make sure that we can optimize the opportunity set for these small businesses. It's truly a place where there is potential, as Jean urged us, to augment the American, the U.S.-based growth rate. Finally, I just want to make one comment about the Veterans Program. In conjunction with the military and with Secretary Solis, we are working very hard on veteran entrepreneurship. So not just create jobs for veterans, but have veterans create businesses, and those businesses create jobs. And many of them come here back with overseas experience, with ideas. I will say that I spent Veterans Day in a UPS store with a veteran business owner of a franchise, and the International Franchise Association has joined with the First Lady in making it easier for veterans, in fact less costly. They pay a discounted veteran franchise fee. And we stood up in one of those great stores and were able to show how a veteran can start a business and then hire more people, including more veterans. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Now we've taken a tour of our first stoplight chart. I think whether red, yellow, green, I was
complaining.
Still impressed with the amount of work that has to be done on all of them. So we'll stay focused on that, and we'll keep giving you regular updates. Now let's turn to current business, which has 4 letters that we are proposing today. The first one is deals with expanding the WTO's Information Technology Agreement, a subject near and dear to our Vice Chair's heart. Ursula?
Very near and dear to my heart. I'll make this quick. This has been an ongoing subject. This letter recommends that the administration work with our trading partners to negotiate an updated and expanded information technology agreement. It was signed originally in 1996. The ITA eliminated tariffs on the majority of the information technology products to most major export markets around the world. Unfortunately or fortunately, technology moves on, and the agreement hasn't moved as quickly along to match the technology moves, and it has not been updated for that since that time. It's one of the most successful agreements that we have, that the U.S. has, and we need to actually update it. So industry studies indicate that an expanded ITA, both expanded in type of products but also in markets that it impacts, would impact us of over $122 billion in trade. Yeah, it's big. In addition to expanded product coverage, as I said, we need to expand country participation as well. Mexico and Brazil are the 2 places that we're focused on, and we are sure that in my industry alone, if we could balance the field a little bit, we'll be able to increase our trade in those our competitiveness and our trade in those 2 marketplaces. I appreciate the support that the administration has already shown for this initiative. They just had a meeting at APEC this weekend and made some good progress there. And in recent weeks, the European Union supported the idea of moving these negotiations forward at the WTO separately and outside of the context of this broader Doha round that's coming up. Expanding the ITA is the kind of short-term and targeted initiative that we need to provide an immediate and substantial boost to the U.S. exports and jobs. And so ensuring an open access of all of our products, all types of information technology products to all of the markets is something that will drive exports and jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Well explained. Any discussion or objections? Seems like a pretty straightforward one. So without objection, the letter is adopted by the Council. Second is a letter on expanding trade with the developing democracies in the Middle East and North Africa. And Andrew Liveris will discuss it. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Middle East, North Africa, Arab Spring, and the U.S. political presence and U.S. military presence we all read about. The U.S. commercial presence is something that, frankly, we needed to pay attention to. So this letter addresses that and does a very fine job. And I don't know whether you're aware of some of the statistics, but our exports to the Middle East have grown 2.5 times faster than actually our exports to the rest of the world. So we are already, as a country, it represents our 4th largest export market. So for all the right reasons, this letter addresses why we've got to ramp up our commercial engagement. And my own company, with a $20 billion investment in Saudi Arabia, I can tell you the Middle Easterners and North Africans, Jeff Immett led a delegation to Tunisia and Egypt right after the fall of those two regimes. They want American products and American engagement. They are still, on a commercial basis, our friends. And so if you look at what we've recommended here, we see some tangible ways we can up the ante here and help them reform their systems. Firstly, we have focused in on 3 areas: water, alternative energy, and infrastructure. And the letter basically talks about building domestic support for necessary reforms within their systems so that we can see improvements in the trade agenda, ultimately leading to free trade agreements. So, 1, promoting national infrastructure projects and helping them with our technologies, opening up areas such as water supply, such as infrastructure around airports and a whole lot of other areas that we cover, and even green cities, helping them get a jump start on the rebuild and using most efficient American technologies to get the green footprint in place. Technology transfer with IP support, which of course is a very big part of protecting our American enterprise and intellectual property. And third, regional integration efforts. And here, Mr. Secretary, you know, the Commerce Department inside U.S. embassies, we've had the Secretary of State here saying, you know, they are the first American business engagement. I know you think that way, and we'll get around to that on another topic we'll get on to later in this agenda. But harmonization of standards, removal of non-tariff tariff barriers, which, you know, we see aplenty, really getting them up to scratch on removal of subsidies and why that's good for their population, and then, of course, the whole market access topic. That's all in this letter. I've given you as quick a summary as I can, as fast as I can, but that's the letter, Mr. Chairman.
An unusually brief summary for you.
Thank you, sir. I am so conscious of your time management skills, Jim. I'm actually, you got me worried now, so.
Yeah, I can tell I'm having a real impact.
Jim.
Listen, this really is an incredibly important topic, and does Ambassador Kirk want to comment? Yeah, why don't you do that, and then I'll go back.
I will do my best to match Andrew's brevity in the sense that the letter, we think, very much amplifies the direction that the president, sort of an ambition, laid out for this region in the speech he made back in May. Just to give you some comfort, I think you know we have trade agreements with Bahrain, Oman, Jordan, Israel, Morocco. So obviously we're focusing on the rest of the region. Ambassador Shapiro has been working also very closely, frankly, with our colleagues in the European Union, recognizing this could be an area we could have some great synergies. We have some capacity constraints in the region right now. A lot of these governments are reconstituting, trying to decide, but we just had a team over recently and met with Egypt and others. We are a little bit ahead of you in that we actually published a notice in the Federal Register back in September, asking the public for sort of comments on a broad strategy for what we call our MENA Trade and Investment Partnership. And we got pretty good responses to that, and we'll be looking at everything from, you know, something similar to what we're doing, a Trans-Pacific Partnership, looking at what we can do in a regional model rather than trying to go in country by country. But I'll be honest, we're probably 2 or 3 steps away from an FTAs for some of these economies just because they aren't, but there is still a lot we can do in that region. So, I mean, your letter, for the most part, I think tracks and is pretty parallel to the engagement that we've got going on.
Terrific. I mean, this really is an incredibly important topic. These fledgling democracies in that part of the world, very important to engage constructively. So we'll keep working with you. Any other discussion? Objection? Without objection, the letter is adopted. Third, a letter on workforce readiness will be explained by Pat. Pat,
Thank you. I will compete for brevity as well. This is a topic that our pre-meetings have addressed in many ways, whether we met with Secretary Panetta yesterday, at Senator Stabenow's reception on agriculture last night, at our breakfast this morning with the Secretary. So it's a very important subject to a lot of us. I'm sorry that our subcommittee chair, Bill Hite, the general president for the United Association of Plumbers and Pipefitters, couldn't be with us today to present it. I did speak with him yesterday, and he sends his regards to everyone. The UAPP has worked hard and conscientiously with many of us in industry to address what we think are important issues. The letter and details are here with actually a very good appendix as well, which I'm sure you all read. I'll just summarize the 4 important areas: upgrading our basic education and expand high skills training, putting training, particularly our best training for veterans, to better equip them for today and tomorrow's economy. Community colleges, retooling them for and a refocus, because a very important resource, and we think it can be a very important part of workforce readiness. And then, as we've all seen, the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math skills all needing to be upgraded. I think many of my colleagues around the table also wanted to comment specifically on a few of these items, so that summarizes the letter.
That's great. I think the, just one little addition, and I think Mary wanted to comment, so I wanted to turn to her in just a second. In our discussion with Secretary Panetta yesterday, a lot of companies are approaching this in different ways. You know, Boeing's approaching it one way, Mary's approaching it, some very innovative stuff. Best practices look just around the PEC. Might supplement some of the stuff, and so we'll keep pushing on that. Mary, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much. This issue is near and dear to my heart. I'm a former teacher, and education has always been very important to me. And because right now in our industry we are having growth and have opportunities to hire people, and finding that it's one of our biggest challenges is being able to find the skilled workforce. So I'd just like to comment on 2 of the recommendations in particular. One is the importance that we need to continually keep in front of everyone of the high school education and graduation. And one of the things that we've done, and I've mentioned this to a few people, that is something, it's just, I think we all have to be thinking futuristic. And we do an internship for teachers in the summer for high school, and we're looking about even putting it down to junior high teachers of a 70-mile radius of our major manufacturing plants. And try to encourage teachers with a paid internship, and they can also receive credit for that 3 weeks, to come in and understand what are the kinds of jobs that we have in our companies. And what's interesting is after they spend 3 weeks, and 1 week is on a Kaizen, so they're on a lean continuous improvement event, and they're of course fantastic contributors to those sorts of events, almost every time, and we've done this for 5 years, I hear them say, well, this is very interesting. I never realized there were so many good jobs in manufacturing. In fact, many of them say, I thought manufacturing was leaving this country, which is one of those myths we have to continually dispel. And so that, I think it's just, again, an example that we as private sector need to collaborate continually with our schools, because next to parents, teachers have a huge influence on young people. And so to have them understand the importance of the kinds of jobs we have in our communities, and also the skills that people need, whether it's the basic math skills, definitely communication, being able to work in a team, all those sorts of things, as well as the soft skills of as showing up every day and finishing jobs. And then I'd also like to just mention that on the readiness programs and working collaboratively with community colleges, recommendation 4, this is a really huge one, and again, it's maybe, as to your point about the best practices and people doing different things, there are a lot of different groups doing some fantastic things to skill up the workforce. And the NAM has been involved in something called workforce skill certification, and actually the president endorsed it last summer at a meeting at Northern Virginia Community College. And it really is working with community colleges and companies and various other organizations to have skills certification for 500,000 employees in the next 5 years. And I think that's actually a low number to be able to go and work very successfully in manufacturing jobs. And so for us, I know right now we have trained over 80 welders this year, and we are working with the community colleges and the American Welding Association to continue to improve our training programs and the skill certification. So I just believe that there's a lot of opportunity for people in our country, and military included, although many military people come with fantastic skills to start with. It's just getting the right match. And what's very frustrating, I think, for most of us is we see the 9% unemployment rate and we're looking for people.
And it's that dilemma of fitting, maybe we're not in the right places, you know, we're different locales, but also just matching the people up and willing to do the training, doing the training to get people to have great jobs, because there are good jobs available in this country. We just got to get the match. And I think we can do that, and when we do, we'll just all be stronger. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Terrific. Ursula, did you have a comment on STEM?
This is my, as most of you know, my passion, so much so that I serve on the board of an organization started at the behest of the president, called Change the Equation, and it's all about improving education in science, technology, engineering, and math at the high school and earlier levels. I agree with you, Mary. It's a kind of a frustrating place to be, where many of us need employees, but can't really always find them in the right. Some of it is location-based, but a lot of it is skill-based. This is an area that all of us around the table are engaged in different ways. Every CEO around this table is engaged somehow or the other, in either Change the Equation or in an organization like it. And it's just one that it's going to take a little bit of time, but we have to keep focused on and keep diligent about. And this idea of engaging two-year colleges, community colleges, is very, very important. It's a resource that we lost sight of that can help us add value, and Change the Equation has just gotten engaged with community colleges as well to make sure that we can actually bridge this gap that we have. So I agree totally.
Thank you,
We have to do
Ursula.
better.
Gene, did you want to weigh in?
Just briefly on the second challenge here that we have. You're absolutely right, the community colleges where a lot of this should start. Basically, when we talk about bolstering the STEM skill and education and training, I think the community colleges, they're the ones that are uniquely suited to facilitate those sort of dialogues and convene the local educational partners, employers, and labor organizations to identify the skill sets needed to prepare locally for the 21st century. The recommendation to boost this workforce readiness program at community colleges should utilize what we believe are the following: NAM, Endorsed Manufacturing Skills Certification System. The second is the fast tracking of the Right Skills Now initiative that will target specific skill gaps and provide accelerated training to directly fill these gaps. And third is the public-private partnerships to create degree programs, which are essential to support economic development efforts. We believe that this should be a high priority for the administration and these different departments.
Thank you, Gene. Did you have a comment, Stephanie? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think much of what I was going to say has already been covered, so I'll just be brief in, first of all, congratulating Pat and the team on what I think is one of the strongest letters on workforce readiness that I've seen. And just to reinforce the engagement that I believe corporations can have with junior colleges and local community colleges in the skill building, including the donation of state-of-the-art equipment that vocational training can take place on. I think this is a big opportunity for us. We're seeing that, I said yesterday at Secretary Panetta's discussion, we're able to marry that with a local veterans retraining program to get them into that vocational training setting. So I just congratulate the team on this letter with strong support.
Thank you, Stephanie. Your support's important, too. Andrew, did you want to say something, or has it all been coming? Okay. Yes, Madam Secretary. Yeah. No, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm really impressed with the letter and concur with so much of what has been said already, and look forward to continuing to find out how we can better improve our systems to make sure that everyone does get a credential. Because in many cases, the dislocated workers that Gene Sperling spoke about earlier, we have a lot of folks out there that just may have only completed a secondary education. They've been committed working in manufacturing for 20 years, yet they don't have a qualified credential that can give them that entree into a business. So we're looking at other tools that are out there right now and hopeful that we can get something on the ground. But overall, I concur with much of what you're doing. We're doing many things now at the Department of Labor, working with community colleges and the manufacturers, and really want to improve upon those relationships, including apprenticeship partnership programs. As you know, many of those that have functioned very well are public-private partnerships. They're fully run by, I would say, mostly management, and they are terrific models to be able to facilitate and get our veterans and dislocated workers back into the system with highly qualified credentials. So I just want to echo everything that's been said and really congratulate the team on your effort.
Thank you, and your support is really important. Appreciate that. And John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, super fast, Jim. And I love the fact that virtually everybody here wants to say something about this most important subject. And yes, we've done a lot, but somehow we have a heck of a lot of people that are not finding jobs. And there are multiple reasons for that, but some of it is the fit, some of it is the preparedness, all those things. I want to touch on two things. One is by chance at a younger age, I lived in Germany for a time, and the culture with respect to vocational training there is just so fundamentally different. And they've been enormously successful as a consequence, because there's not a sense that somehow if you don't do a full university program, you don't feel a little out of it. In fact, you take pride, and your family takes pride, and substantially equal pride, to the traditional university education. And I think there's a lot to learn there, and that's much observed. The second thing that I want to pick up on, and Jim, I thought your point about this group looking at best practices is a really good idea. I want to raise one. This is more in the form of a question, but it's an experience. So I've recruited a friend, just a wonderful friend of mine, a guy that I'd gone to college with and so on, who's been in the manufacturing field for, the last 40 years in various ways. And he's been very successful, and I won't go through all that. But he decided he feels so strongly about this that about a decade ago, a little more than that, he decided he was going to create his own vocational education program for the fields, and these are small and medium-sized manufacturing. That's been his field. And he did it for 9 years, and he had the financial capacity to say, well, I'm just going to take it on. But what he ran into by way of local, state, and local taxation, local and state permitting, just unbelievable. So when he tells this story, you say to yourself, companies wonderfully are doing the training, community colleges are doing the training, but I wonder how targeted that is and how precisely that fits where the jobs are. So, and the best practices, I'd love to see this group begin to get at some of these possibly regulatory issues. I don't know what they are, taxation issues, because there's some things that aren't happening here.
Okay, we'll take that on as a challenge. Appreciate your comments, John. Are there any other comments? Okay, without objection, we shall adopt the letter. The last, but certainly not least, Raul could not be here with us today. He had a medical issue, so let me attempt to summarize the letter from Pexia. This is the fourth letter, and it urges the administration to continue and complete its review of the two export control regimes, some of which we've already talked about, move to a single IT system, which I think is probably the most important part of the whole recommendation, conduct outreach, and consider a trusted exporter program, which is detailed in the letter. Implementing these ideas will make our system effective, efficient, and easier for companies to understand and comply with, while importantly protecting national security, which I always thought was this recommendation originally coming out of the Defense Department just was a point of reassurance for all of us as we march through this particular initiative. So, John, do you have any comments on this one?
Just quickly.
It's a relatively big deal for the business community.
Yeah, this is not on that, though. I think it's important, but on this, how do we move more of the products that we have in our country into a category in which we can make them export products? And so that's part of the Department of Commerce's responsibility on these so-called dual-use products that have some military and security applications, but right now have been much too much lodged together with counterparts of those products that are entirely commercial products that we ought to make available to exporters and sell to the rest of the world. And so I just wanted to report on that. The administration, we are working on this on a category by category basis. There are proposed revisions to what's called the U.S. munitions list and the commerce control list, and the effect of that will transfer tens of thousands of truly small, insignificant military parts for their commercial applications around the world.
Terrific. Any other comments on this particular one, Mike?
Yes, just to add to that, and as the Secretary said, we are going category by category. It's painstaking work, and we appreciate the input that the private sector has had. We have our newly confirmed Undersecretary Eric Hirschhorn here, who's running a good part of this effort. But I'll give you two examples. We did a category that was about vehicles. It had 12,000 items on it on the U.S. munitions list. We moved 11,000 over to the commerce control list, which will make it more susceptible to more flexible licensing rules. Some of those things will now be able to be exported without a license altogether around the world. And just recently, I guess last Monday, we published the category that had to do with aerospace, which might be of interest to some in the room, where 100,000 items were moved off of the U.S. munitions list to the CCL and will now be eligible for export. Our gating issue here, the next obstacle we have, is that by tradition, we notify Congress when we move an item from one list to the other. And I'm glad Congressman Reichert is here. In the past, it has taken an average of over 200 days to move a single item. We are in the process of moving hundreds of thousands of items from one list to the other, and we need to come up with a new process with Congress so that each item doesn't take 200 days to move. But our hope is that by the end of this year, we're through about half of the licensing items, and we finish the rest of it next year. And you'll see, I think, a fundamentally different export control system, as you said, consistent with our national security needs, but which will also help our exports.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. A big deal. Any other comments? Okay, so if no more discussion, without objection, we will adopt that letter. Mike, while you're geared up, maybe we could put all three subjects of yours together, maybe a quick report on G20, APEC, as well as in your role as the Chief Economic Advisor of the President. We would appreciate National Security Council, I'm sorry. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear directly from you about the follow-up efforts that have taken since our Blair House meeting that many of us in the room were part of. Yeah, it'd be great.
Well, let me start with that and thank everyone around the room, and particularly Andy Liveris and his team and the subcommittee for the work on this. As you recall, we launched an effort there to first identify our priority markets around the world, both countries and sectors, and then the specific obstacles to U.S. exports in each of those areas, and the major policy initiatives that could be pursued to remove those obstacles. And we did it consciously, very much in a public-private partnership. We came up with our draft ideas about this. We shared it with the subcommittee. We got a lot of very good input and from companies in each of the relevant sectors and companies that operate in many of the target countries. And I think we now have sort of a blueprint for how to go out these obstacles from our perspective and from the private sector's perspectives in a meaningful way, and that will help inform our policy processes here. We've done about a dozen countries and a dozen major sectors. It probably covers about 80% of our targeted trade, and we will continue to update this and look forward to your continued input. But this should feed into when the President goes to Brazil and we pull out the Brazil page and say, here are the three major obstacles that we've identified that could really increase U.S. exports, and we'll have that capability to know that we're standing with the private sector and ensuring that we're focusing on the right things. So, again, thank you to the subcommittee and the staff for all their work to put into it.
Andrew, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I'd love to, and maybe not as brief as last time, Jim, but I do think I want to bow back.
You've done an enormous amount of work on this.
Yeah, we all collectively want to bow back to the administration. I think Gene Sperling said it very well earlier, and Secretary Daly, and now from Mike and the USTR as well, Mr. Kirk. We are working as a public-private partnership in this forum like I think aspirationally we should all want to work, and trade is in everyone's best interest, and trade strategies are now taking hold. And not only have we got the Declaration of Success on the 3 that was signed, but now with the great work that's being done by this collective body, of course with the administration representing us in key forums, we're starting to see country-based, sector-based trade strategies now as really one-page strategies that can be now used by all of us collectively, the business world, to help our employees understand why trade is good for them and why it means jobs, and that's something that I know many of us take to heart. But certainly putting all that together so that we can really look as a country to export the best trade systems in the world, values and standards. So there are 3 or 4 things, thematics, that we are all working on, and I'll try and go through them relatively quickly, but I think these are very important, and there's others in the room who are going to pile on, Jim, if you don't mind. So theme number 1, repurpose trade policy to target emerging export markets and really create U.S. jobs by so doing. I talked about Middle East, North Africa, but Asia, I mean, everywhere in the world, this is a massive opportunity for the United States, and there are 3 aspects of that matter. I've mentioned them in the MENA conversation. Non-tariff tariff barriers. And Jim, you and I and others know about China's indigenous innovation, and we know, and Secretary Bryson, you've already made reference to your 2 interactions with the Chinese already as an example of, where they are in terms of their script and their hymn sheet. And, we have to be appropriate, obviously professional, we have to be statesmanlike, but at the same time, we can't allow cheating. And so, to say it very aggressively, and I think this is a very important statement. So government procurement, especially in the emerging sectors, and how we absolutely, totally don't allow this. You have to make it here and invent it here, local. We can't go the other way and say make it in America means buy American. So we don't do that. At the same time, other countries do. So we have to work on that in our strategies. Trade policies, the FTAs, I think USTR has already talked about that, and standards. There's no question we have the best standards in the world in terms of how we protect our workers, how we go ahead and sell our products, the feedback back from our products back into our system on making sure we absolutely totally comply with environmental, health and safety standards. These are all necessary things that we include in trade policy to help everyone, rising tide lift all boats. So that whole thematic around repurposing trade policy around those 3 subpoints is very key. The second theme I mentioned already as well, but just to reinforce, and that is our embassies and U.S. commercial diplomacy. And I'm so excited, Secretary Bryson, with what you and you've already said. The deployments around the world, Secretary of State's referenced them in these meetings, are so key that we have a partnership approach with American business, small, medium, and large, so that the many thousands of American businesses that don't export to more than 1 country that I heard earlier today do in fact get the 2nd country and the 3rd country, and our embassies play a very active role. So there's a whole thematic around that. Export financing, and Chairman Hochberg's great work, and Administrator Mills, and all the things we're doing on the financing side to facilitate what is the blood of trade, which is the lifeblood of trade, which is finance. That's the 3rd thematic. And the 4th, which is maybe the most important of them all, and that is connecting domestic policy, job creation, and exports emphatically in everything we say and do. And that American competitiveness and development in America, economic development, ties in directly to job creation in America, and it relates to exports. And I think those are the 4 thematics. That lays out a pretty ambitious set of agendas that we keep working on in this subcommittee and this conversation. Mike Froman and others are working very much with us in this subcommittee, and we're very excited by that. But I've got some others who want to make some comments. So, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to direct it, or would you?
Sure, why don't you direct it?
So, Alan, I think you're up first.
Thank you, Andrew. I would just like to point out one thing in a little bit more detail that Andrew has talked about. And Ford, as you know, is expanding everywhere around the world. They love the Ford brand. They love it. It's associated with the United States ingenuity and technology. And in all my years, I have never seen such working together between Commerce and Treasury, the State Department, and especially the USTR on working the common issues, the intersections are allowing us to do this. And it's almost like the all-time public-private partnership in each of these countries. Yes. And just giving you one example that that Ambassador Kirk and I have talked about frequently over the last few years on the free trade agreements, now the TPP, just the awareness of the non-tariff barriers especially starting with currency discipline, just for an example, that there's one that crosses 3 or 4 different departments, and the fact that we are working it together now and figuring out different ways to get solutions to these is absolutely letting us accelerate our expansion. So I just want to share with you that your goal and your stated goal of working together on integrated policies and doing it right there in every country around the world is really paying off, and I just encourage you to keep doing that.
Terrific, Alan.
I think Stephanie wants to add something.
Great.
Jim, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I know one component of looking at some of the market opportunities through this program is renewable energy and energy efficiency, and I strongly applaud that. I think there's some great recommendations in terms of how we can position ourselves better to compete in terms of exporting, whether that be standards, whether that be encouraging the renewable energy top prospects and things like that. But the biggest thing we can do for renewable energy is to create the industrial manufacturing base for that here in the United States. And this gets at Andrew's point in terms of the internal and external marriage coming together. And that's a big, big deal. We need an overarching energy policy. We need a look at standards and codes and permitting, and we need to create the domestic demand for this renewable energy and energy efficiency that allows us to grow our manufacturing capabilities so we actually have something to export globally. So these two have to be brought together. Otherwise, we're trying to push a wet noodle up a hill because we're not going to have anything to export. And that is the big challenge that I see in renewables.
Okay. Jim, and you and Ursula maybe want to add anything to this?
No, I think, Ursula, you good? Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you very much, Mike. Mike, do you have a quick comment on G20 APEC report to the group?
Sure. Just on G20, I think it was an important meeting. Obviously, the focus was on the Eurozone crisis, but there was other work that got done there through the finance channel. We, I think, got countries to agree to a growth and jobs strategy, with countries agreeing to specific items that they would take on to spur growth in the short run, including China agreeing to be determined to be more flexibility in exchange rate. And so these are these incremental processes that we undergo here. And with regard to Doha, which I know has been of concern to this group, I think for the first time, the G20, there was a recognition that we were not going to achieve an agreement in Doha on the current path we were on, and direction to the trade ministers to pursue creative new approaches, both to pursue the issues of Doha, but also new challenges and opportunities on the trading regime. And I think we'll see that at the ministerial that Ambassador Kirk will go to in December to begin that process. On APEC, which occurred just this last weekend, I'd say two things. First, there's a lot of good work that gets done throughout the year among the APEC economies. And for example, they committed a couple of years ago to reduce transaction costs of trade in the region by 10%, and they benchmarked themselves and believe that they've achieved 5%, that they're halfway there. Similarly, they have an ease of doing business goal of increasing ease of doing business by 25%, and again, they're making progress on that. At the leaders' meeting itself, there were some important agreements reached in various areas. One was about innovation, and basically the APEC economies signed on to a series of innovation principles which underscore the importance of market-driven innovation as opposed to indigenous innovation. There was agreement to reduce tariffs to below 5% on a series of environmental goods and services, which is something we've been trying to get done in Doha and was unable to, and so we tried to pursue it in APEC. And there was agreement to pursue better regulatory policy, including having centralized regulation, open comment by the public, cost-benefit analysis. It's a series of process improvements that we'll now follow up on there. I would just mention one last thing, because you mentioned business visas. Congress passed, I believe by unanimous consent last week, the APEC Business Travel Card bill, and the President signed it there, and that will allow Americans who are part of the global entry program to now get an APEC card, as many of our APEC partners do around the country, around the world, and be able to go through the diplomat and an expedited line in airports all over Asia. So it will save you all countless hours. It's part of a larger travel initiative of looking at cargo and pre-clearance and passenger information, as well as best practices among airports. So, APEC does a lot of just good nuts and bolts work about improving the flow of people and trade across the region, and this was a good meeting for that.
It was a small step with a big impact. I mean, that was really key. Listen, just segueing from your discussion to trade, and while we have Ambassador Kirk with us, lumped together perhaps, Ambassador, the Russia WTO ascension, the related PNTR, just one small example with Russia, and then lump that together perhaps with TPP, so we can get into your perspective on both of those. But the EU is about to complete an agreement with Russia that takes the 17% tariff on aircraft down to zero. WTO ascension will largely accomplish the same thing for us and others. So just in my world, this is huge. 17% on these big things is a lot of money, and otherwise we would be significantly disadvantaged versus Airbus. But look, your comments on Russia, PNTR, and TPP would be greatly appreciated. We want to get behind you.
Okay, well, I'm happy to do that. First of all, I have to begin by saying thank you to members of the PEC for your extraordinary support in helping us get the trade agreements with Korea, Panama, and Colombia done. That was a collective, victory for all of us in the sense that success has 1,000 fathers. So thanks to you all. And I say that because it really, the energy, the lift from that was noticeable, was tangible in our discussions in APEC, in validating what some people are, and I wouldn't say a shift, but our expression of our aspirations throughout the Asia Pacific. It was just invaluable to our discussions on that and TPP and everything else. And it did sort of put to bed this notion somehow the United States was ambivalent about trade and didn't have the political will to make some of these tough decisions. So the fact that we did it, the fact that we got them all passed with record amounts, and I appreciate Congressman Reichert, he was working his rear end off on all of these, really helped us to get that. But let me I'll take, maybe I'll work from the back since Mike took care of APEC. We have gotten to a point that the working party report in Geneva on Russia was adopted next week, which means that it is almost a certainty that Russia will be invited to join the WTO at our December ministerial. Thanks to Ambassador Shapiro, the United States was largely responsible for that because of the work we did in the year following President Medvedev's visit last year, that we really worked hard to resolve our issues. Now our challenge, and at the risk of validating some people's opinion that we have become a part of the marketing sales arm of Boeing. But Jim did give us, our real world challenge is that now in a very compressed congressional calendar, we are going to have to deal with this issue of revoking Jackson-Vanik so that we can extend permanent normal trade relations to Russia. Otherwise, we're in a unique position. Almost everybody in Geneva gives us credit for sort of pushing this over the hill. We don't revoke Jackson-Vanik, then we have to invoke something called non-application, which means we don't get the benefit, which would be horrible. Now, we'll have a little bit of time once Russia's voted in procedurally. Their Duma has to do some things to implement the legislation, but I would not want to play the lottery with how quickly Russia might do that versus not just Jim, but a number of our business has been in the position you heard where the rest of the world's getting the economic benefit from that, but we don't. So one, we're going to really need you all's help in getting a Congress that may have a little bit of trade fatigue and certainly not ready to go through this experience on Russia. One important message you can help us get, because what we hear from a lot of members is that, listen, Kirk, you all told us the same thing when we let China in, and look what happened to us. But in all of our discussions here, what you've heard is some reference, and Alan made a wonderful reference to it, is that we've learned from our experiences on China and other agreements, and that's what we're trying to incorporate in everything, in TPP and APEC, and certainly with respect to Russia. And one of the important changes we made was China had very long periods of time to implement many of its commitments. In the case of Russia, we've required them to do probably 80–90% of them up front. So if we can just help people understand this is a different world. We did learn from China, but this is also an extraordinary opportunity for us to bring the largest economy not in the rules-based trading system into it. And then we have the added benefit, following up on Andrew's point, of now at least we have a way to hold Russia accountable, where right now we just sit around and sort of complain about their behavior. Mike referenced a little bit the discussion about Doha that grew out of the G20 meeting in Cairns. There has been a moment of clarity in Geneva, even though it took a lot of our partners a while to get there, that it just doesn't make sense to keep trying to force ourselves down a road that has not taken us where we want to go. And so we will be seeking in the coming months to look at all other strategies that help us advance liberalization. And one of the main points the United States has pressed is that we have to move away from linking the value of the WTO singularly to whether or not Doha passes. Because in a world in which there's been an explosion of multilateral and bilateral trade agreements, the policing enforcement effort of the World Trade Organization becomes that much more important. And again, that's borne out in the comments of many of you about the non-tariff barriers and others. And so there is plenty of valuable work to be done. And one of the elements that came out of APEC, again, because of the strong urging of this body, is the leaders embracing the notion of looking more aggressively at what we can do to expand modified intellect, the ITA, for example, as an area that we can move forward. So you'll see a lot of the work and a lot of the thought that have been socialized here in the PEC beginning to be reflected in our work there. Finally, I would say, and not to be too parochial, I think the biggest success story coming out of the APEC summit was the movement of our leaders embracing, acknowledging the broad outlines of our agreement on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They also set a work plan for us going forward. But again, whether it was our passing Korea and others, or this moment of clarity in Doha, we've entered a world now where other economies within the region realize, okay, first of all, these guys are serious about this. This is for real. It may not, we've gone from some people thinking, well, maybe this will be the only game in town, to some people thinking now, this is going to be the best game in town. And so you saw public expressions of Japan, Mexico, and Canada that they want to begin a process about thinking about how they might join. Those of us that are already members have welcomed that, but we've also made it plain, if you're going to join, this is going to be a merge into the stream we're going. We are not going to slow down this process. We are not going to lower our ambition. We welcome interest of all of these economies, but understand you're going to have to seek that same level of ambition. The most interesting thing, and I won't name them, is we are now beginning to get offers from non-APEC countries about joining APEC. Well, if you knew who some of them were, you might not be so pleased, which is why I won't name them. But the good news is this is a great opportunity for us, and going back again to your points about standards and out, we can set the level of ambition. It validates our decision to get in when we did. You all as businessmen and women understand the value of being first to market. And that's why when we got in and made the decision a year ago that President Obama announced in Singapore, we saw the real value of the United States helping to set the bar really high and elevate standards, protection of intellectual property rights, incorporation of SMEs, many of the ideas that you talked. So I've told everybody there are no gone fishing signs at USTR. We've got plenty to do. The other thing, while I have the floor, we left APEC, and Secretary Bryson and I will be leaving in the morning for China for the next session of our Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, addressing all issues you all have raised. You've seen in the public comments, and I will only reflect those, but President Obama was as forthright publicly and otherwise as he could be that we welcome this partnership with China, but China's got to play by the rules. And we are never going to yield on insisting that our businesses have non-discriminatory access to their markets as we have given them ours. But, I mean, the plus side, China is now our #1 agriculture market. On our broader goal of the President's Export Initiative, we are well on that pace. We're on pace to reach a record level. Exports are up almost 30% this year. Ag exports may reach $138 billion. And what's happening in the commodity world, you can see the promise there. So lots of things going, lots of us to do, but the work that we do here at PAC, the ideas you all present to us really do help inform our work. And I hope you're beginning to see the results of that and believe this isn't just where you come make a report, we ignore it. It really is making a big difference in our policy.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you all.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll.
Well,
We want to bask in the reflected glory. Good stuff. Hey, listen, you know, one of the things that always that you always end with in these discussions on trade agreements is the necessity, the requirement, and the responsibility to communicate to the American people, because it's still a tough communications job. There's still miscommunication. And John, I know you wanted to have a thought or two on that one.
Well, you know, I could say some things about export strategies, but what I really want to do is...
John, I didn't mean to cut you off. You wanted to say something else. Sorry.
Yeah, no, on one thing, and that is the trade strategies. No, listen, what was done, in my judgment, in Hawaii with the extraordinary work of Ron, Mike, and others, and the president. And I was simply, you know, it was an honor for me to be part of this consistently. But I think it's extraordinary, and it's a foundation for the future that, to me, is compelling. And as Ron, or I should say Ambassador Kirk, said, there now is a momentum. There really is a force to this that is stunning. So it's not to say there are not a lot of tough steps ahead. There are a lot of tough steps ahead. But a kind of foundation has been laid here that is really, really powerful. So, yeah. Now, Jim, is this the right time for me to pick up just a little more on the export, or should we?
Sure. Why don't you do it? And then.
John, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was trying to maintain the liver standard of brevity, but I do, as proud as I am of that we passed them, I do want to remind you, I mean, the good thing is we've never passed 3 trade agreements before. The challenge means we've never implemented 3 trade agreements at one time. So, you know, just to be sure, we've got an extraordinary amount of work to be done. But again, our team is already engaged. We're working with Korea to make sure they get theirs passed. Ambassador, you keep hearing Miriam Shapiro's name, but folks, she's done an incredible amount of work this year. She was the lead on our Russia accession. She handled the Brazil cotton negotiation. She handled the signing of our ACTA, which is our new trade, anti-counterfeiting trade enforcement, and then she also led our team on Panama and Colombia. And so she just came back.
Gave her all the easy ones.
South America. I still like to say I'm very good at delegating. My bride says I'm lazy, but either way I get to the same place. But we've got a lot of work to do on implementing, but we've already met with all 3 of our partners, because to get the benefits of these, we obviously need these agreements in place. So we're running on a really fast pace to do those at the same time we're trying to move forward with TPP and everything else we discussed.
Thanks for your leadership. Thanks very much. John, did you have a comment on export policy that you wanted to make?
Yeah, just one,
Sure.
only one thing.
Yep.
And that is, I want to turn this over to Undersecretary Francisco Sanchez of the International Trade Administration. He's done this. He's done it for a long time. He does it with unimaginable energies. They're moving around the world all the time. And I could say something to be a lot better if he said it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Just to say that the International Trade Administration was very pleased to provide the staffing for this market sector analysis. We've taken your recommendations to heart, and the next step for the International Trade Administration is to have very specific action plans as we do our work on non-tariff trade barriers and export promotion. I look forward to, at the next PEC meeting, giving you reports on how we're doing on these action plans. And just very briefly, if I may, Mr. Secretary, on export.gov, thank you for your comments, but let me just say you haven't seen anything yet. We did the benchmarking that Scott mentioned. We shamelessly borrowed from Australia and a few other places, and by mid-year 2012, export.gov will be best in class, not just in the country, but best in class export promotion website in the world. And we look forward to presenting that to the PEC at the next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Terrific. I think Secretary LaHood be here in just a minute. Maybe I could cover some administrative details, and then, or Scott, did you want to say something?
Just wanted to make one comment
Sure.
on the topic.
Yeah.
I think Andrew brought up the fact that we're going to have to really monitor the job creation. Alan and I and others were at the state dinner when President Lee was here. He actually challenged the people who voted no on the trade agreements that we're going to create a lot of jobs. We'll show you we'll create a lot of jobs. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to track that. You know, at UPS, we've went back and monitored the last several trade agreements, and we've averaged a 28% increase in volume to those countries versus an average of about mid-single digits before the trade agreements. So I think if each of the countries, or each of the companies, go back and monitor this, we need to help, I think, commerce so we can sell this.
Part of the
next agreement comes
communications
up.
problem. Yeah, get some data. That's a great idea, Scott. Okay, I appreciate your comments there. Just a couple of comments, administrative in nature, while we wait for Secretary LaHood. Meeting dates for next year, I'm sure your staffs have given them to you, but June 6th and December 6th. So you only have to remember June and December. 6th is the same for both months. And we still are hopeful of scheduling a trip to Brazil. Right now, we're kicking around some dates in March. But stay tuned. I think we have to discuss it with the new secretary, who for whom things are a blur right now. So I think we'll settle down and do that.
If it works for the group, we'll do it.
Yeah, good. And the SME roundtables, this is what I was thinking of. Gene, in his tireless effort to reach out locally with a big agenda, we're thinking about Chicago and New Orleans, and I know there'll be some announcements coming out, and I know we'll all try to support it.
That works for us.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Let's see. We don't. What's that?
We have a statement too.
Oh, excuse me, I have one more thing I can do. We have a statement that, actually, this is sort of consistent with the stoplight thought. We've got a statement that sort of threads the needle between shamelessly discussing what we've accomplished and the modesty that should go with hard effort and hard work. So we've commented in a statement. It's in front of you. If there are no objections, we'll go ahead and this statement has been worked with people who are important and like it. So unless there's something, if there's something you want to put your body in front of, we will now adopt the statement. Thank you. I think it's appropriate. And do we? Maybe we could have Pat and Scott lead a little discussion on infrastructure in place of Secretary LaHood, because I think you two are going to make some comments in support of it. Maybe you could add a little information to your comments that would supplement or would take the place of an actual presentation on it. So.
Is Secretary LaHood joining us?
Yes, he is.
Is he? Should we wait? All right. Yeah, we're hurting. Hey. Hello.
Perfect timing.
Mr. Secretary, good to have you here. Yeah, Jim McNerney, good to see you. Yeah, I'm good, good.
Perfect timing.
We have literally completed all other business, with the exception of your comments on infrastructure, and we very much look forward to it. And we have a couple of people who would like to weigh in, and good, in anticipated support of what you're about to say. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and I'm sorry I'm late, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to
say a few words about what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years. The President really has focused a lot on infrastructure, and we've spent a lot of time traveling the country promoting the idea that infrastructure really does create jobs. I think I've been to 48 states and over 200 cities. I've traveled with the President on a number of occasions when we've talked about building roads, building bridges, building transit systems, building ports. I'm very proud of the fact that at DOT we used our Tiger money to invest in 13 ports. That's 13 more ports than have ever been invested in any administration, because we believe ports are a real economic engine. I was in Savannah, Georgia yesterday and talked about the port there and investing in the port there. We've also taken our Tiger money and really invested in opportunities for what we believe is the best freight rail system in America. We're the envy of the world when it comes to freight rail. And we selfishly invested almost $500 million in freight rail because it helps us with the President's vision to implement high-speed rail in America. We've put over $500 million into the freight rail, give them a chance to fix up their infrastructure, their tracks, and other infrastructure, so that we've been able over the last 2 years to enter into agreements with our friends in freight rail so we can use their lines when they're not using them and get trains to higher speeds. There's obviously not enough money to build all the infrastructure we need for high-speed rail, so we need our friends in freight rail. And the money we've invested is a very good investment of taxpayer money. The other thing the President has talked about for 2.5 years and included in the American Jobs Act is a $10 billion infrastructure bank. When you look at the kind of money that you can really leverage with an infrastructure bank, it's millions of dollars. The President proposed an infrastructure bank to leverage money not just for roads and bridges, but for water treatment plants, for sewage treatment plants, to fix up the locks and dams. You know, Congress has passed WRDA bills, but they've never put the money behind it. So we have 50-year-old locks and dams that are antiquated, that need to be fixed up. We have communities all over America that need their water treatment, sewage treatment plants. They don't have the money. And the $10 billion in the American Jobs Act for an infrastructure bank would leverage millions of dollars. We have proved it with our TIFIA loan that we have, where we've leveraged a lot of money with communities. The President really believes in the infrastructure bank. We need to convince our friends in Congress, and I'm sorry that I have to look at you, Congressman, but you seem the only big one here. But Congress needs to get with the program here. The amount of money that can be leveraged with an infrastructure bank is extraordinary. And so ports, our friends in freight rail, the money that we think we can leverage with an infrastructure bank, the money that we've leveraged with TIFIA, really getting the country into high-speed rail. All of these are activities that we've been involved with. I just had a meeting with the President last week where we talked about infrastructure. And the two things he said to me: keep pushing infrastructure. Infrastructure equals jobs. It's a no-brainer. I served in Congress for 14 years. I served on the Transportation Committee for 6 of those 14. We passed 2 bills, 2 transportation bills, with over 400 votes. Transportation has never been partisan, ever. And now is the time, really, for us to say to the Congress, pass a transportation bill and you'll put people to work next construction season, building ports, building roads, building bridges, enhancing our freight rail system, and it's a way to really get America back to work pretty easily. And we've always done it in America. That's the way we've always done it, in a bipartisan way. And so we're going to keep pushing for it. And we appreciate any support we can get from all of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Pat, did you want to make a comment? Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Secretary, first of all, thank you for your comments and being here. I'd like to put another equal sign there because, of course, we're here as the President's Export Council, and we've had some discussions today where exports equal jobs. So infrastructure equals exports equals jobs. Obviously, the rivers, dams, locks and dams, waterways, ports, freight, rail, et cetera, all at the beginning of a very long export logistics chain. So part of our letter was, of course, to encourage the very things you're talking
Mhm.
about. So prioritizing some of these projects as they relate to exports is one of the additions I'd like to suggest in your many comments.
You know, as I've said, we've made, this administration has made a lot of investments in ports, and we also created a plan called the waterway plan, where we actually use the waterways along the ports as a means of transportation. And that, the other thing that we've done, we've convened 2 port summits with all the port directors from all over the country, one in San Diego, one in Chicago. We got them all together. What can we do to be helpful? With the expansion of the Panama Canal, when I was in Savannah yesterday, Savannah, Georgia, it's the 2nd largest port in America, and it's only going to get bigger when the Panama Canal expands. And so we need to continue to make these investments, and we will do that. We're committed to doing that.
Thank you. Scott, did you want to comment?
Well, I strongly support the Secretary's investment in infrastructure. I recently hosted Secretary Geithner in Louisville, Kentucky, where we just finished a $2 billion expansion of our air hub there. And we compared it to the fact the government has to do the same thing, U.S. has to do the same thing. If we're going to double exports in 5 years, we have to invest in the ports and the rail. I mean, we, in 2007 to 2008, when things were growing, obviously there was too much congestion. You know, at UPS, we take goods off of trucks and put them on rail for movements over 1,000 miles because it's better for the carbon footprint. It's better for the environment. It's more efficient. But if it gets too crowded, too congested, then we can't do it. We'll put it back on the highways. The other thing on the highway side of things, for 5 minutes a day, if UPS trucks are delayed 5 minutes a day, it costs us $100 million a year. That's just one fleet. That's just our fleet. So you add the rest of the fleets, you add the people commuting every day. It's incredible the cost of this country. And the last thing, just to support FAA reauthorization. You know, we didn't talk about air traffic control. I mean, I preaching to the choir, but we have to invest in air traffic control. We're got 1950s technology. We're worried about our carbon footprint, and we got 747 circling because of lousy air traffic control.
The most ridiculous thing is that we are on 22nd extension of FAA. We've gone 5.5 years without an FAA bill. And for all the great talk for politicians around here talking about getting the next generation technology, which will guide planes more safely, save a lot of jet fuel, relieve congestion, particularly in the New York airspace, we can't do that on a 30-day extension. We'll never get to next gen. We have a good plan. We need the resources. We need a 5-year bill. We need Congress to pass a 5-year bill. Give us a blueprint. You're absolutely right about this. This is great for, we have the safest and the best aviation system in the world. But we're going to be second here pretty soon if we continue another extension of the FAA, if we don't get a 5-year bill.
We agree. And we have tried to line up behind infrastructure development, but I think we can do it more forcefully in some of our recommendations. And the way you talked about it, Scott and Pat, a direct linkage to the export capacity of this country is a good way to link it and get behind this agenda. So you have our commitment to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have our commitment. Yes?
Well, I need this response.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
I just committed on behalf of all of you.
Thank you,
No,
Jim.
I didn't. No, I didn't. No,
Well,
I didn't.
we need Ray back in Congress
Yeah.
now. He's got all this, all this.
I'm done. I want to do something.
I don't blame you. Well, I have the same frustration you have, Ray. And we are, in Seattle, really recognize your effort and want to compliment you on your work and the administration's work and focusing on the infrastructure, because I couldn't agree more. I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with the fact that, our infrastructure, both roadways, waterways, railways, our electrical grid, you can go on, is in dire need of repair and attention, and Congress needs to move on those items quickly. So I will do that tomorrow. I'll get that all done tomorrow. But I've recognized, in Washington State specifically, and Jim, you'll recognize this too. UPS obviously recognizes we've got gridlock. Most of the cities do. Our port is dealing with a specific issue of harbor maintenance tax, which you're probably fully aware of. And our office, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, we are working on right now on a fix for the harbor maintenance issue that we're going to move forward on here in the next week or so. So we are trying to move things, but I think there's sort of a holding pattern, super committee work and CRs and how complicated that all is. But everyone, I can tell you that everyone in Congress really feels the pressure to move forward, to work together, and to get something done. So I'll commit to that on behalf of my colleagues. Do what I can do and get them to move along with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. I think, Ursula, Mr. Secretary, any final comments before adjournment? Or should we just move adroitly to adjournment?
I have none.
Okay. Yeah.
And I just say thanks. This is fabulous.
It's great to have you join us. Without further ado, meeting is adjourned. Yeah. I know Gene is really on a tight schedule, and so if I could just insert sort of as a sidebar here, because Gene Sperling, we're fortunate to have him with us, and some comments from you as we're moving through this would really be appreciated. And then we'll come back to the stoplight, sure.
I will be brief for two reasons. One, you don't need more intro remarks, and two, I actually have to go run a meeting that deals with some of the issues you were just raising. So in the furtherance of this, we are obviously in the point where we are getting ready for our next budget and next State of the Union. I'll make 4 points pretty quickly. One is that, as you've seen, trade, as difficult as it is, does tend to, if you keep your head down, you can overperform political expectations. And Bill and I and Lael and others remember 99 and 2000 when it was supposed to be complete lame duck, done, ended up being an enormously successful year in terms of China WTO, in terms of the Africa trade agreement, other things. Here, 2011, one of the most divisive years probably, and most weak economic, probably the worst combination of political divisiveness and a bad economy that you've seen, and yet it's going to, when the new year comes, 2011 will have been quite a successful year on trade. We're still pushing on TPP, still pushing on Jackson-Vanik, but it does show me that you can overperform in this area just by moving the ball forward. You do have the opportunity for bipartisanship here that you don't always have. So for all the difficulties, I think this is a good lesson, and I know a lot of people will kind of do the discounting for 2012, and I would just say don't listen. Just keep, head down, just keep going forward. You never know how the environment changes. You never know when people decide they want to show accomplishment, get something done. So I've seen this before. You can overperform political expectations on trade and exports. We're enormously committed here. You can see that from our Chief of Staff. You can see that from the efforts Mike Froman puts in, but also just from the depth of the economic team from John Bryson and Secretary Solis and Karen Mills and others. Secondly, in light of that, the focus on exports, particularly because of the jobs focus, becomes that much more important. This is the part that is the only part the public can really understand. That may be unfortunate that they can't understand fully the benefits of more competition from imports and lower prices and innovation. Those things are all true. They're very difficult to explain. It is the exports that is our chance to kind of communicate to the average person that this is about more jobs. Third point I'd make goes something Bill was saying, which is that the role that you play on the broader pragmatism is so important right now. And what happened on trade adjustment assistance and the FTAs is just a perfect example of that. That was the only way you were going to get the consensus for this to pass. and you have a lot of people who just wanted to rail against the free trade agreements. You had a lot of people who wanted them and didn't want to do anything for workers. And I think the business community played an awfully important role in kind of breaking through the politics and saying, yes, you can be for.
Be kind of the heart of my highest priority. It's really the President's highest priority, sets it out extremely well. And I think all of you understand that what exports mean is opportunities for U.S.-based businesses to provide more jobs, right? Exports provide revenues. They require that we come forth with the products we can best provide, and jobs follow that. So that's incredibly important, and that's true across not just, of course, the larger businesses in our country, but the small and the medium-sized businesses, and I've been meeting with a lot of those. And that's an area in which the financing and support of them is not so great. You know, those that have very prominent and high-stature credit, as usual, they can get financing and financing in favorable terms, but the little guys, not so much. And for example, the manufacturing base among the little guys in this country is extraordinary. Really talented people with drive, and they're looking all the time, but they don't know so much about the export world. So as you know, probably heard these figures, what is it, something like 98% of the businesses in the country don't export at all, and then even among those that do, the fraction that go only to one country is very, very high. So this is an opportunity in the waiting. We can really do something about it. And the kinds of practical recommendations you're making in these meetings are really the core of learning. So mostly what I'm going to do is listen today, and I could take you through the statistics here, and the statistics are stunning, on how we've come under the President's initiative. You've played a big role in that. You know that. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we took any kind of complacency with respect to our ability to hit the full doubling target. So what, for example, about the European financial crisis now, and how might that affect our exports? And obviously, exports to Western Europe, even to Eastern Europe, have been a big part of our export scheme, and you have to believe there are going to be some impacts there and plenty of others. We've talked about APEC. Mike Froman will come in and talk about that, and he'll present it very, very well. Gene Sperling, I suspect you're going to talk a little about that as well. This was my first participation in APEC, and you know, what only stands out, I would say, is the strength with which this administration is addressing opportunities for businesses in our country, balancing the playing field, advocating what U.S. businesses best offer, working hard with the themes of innovation, of creation, of entrepreneurship, but also just plain really capable people who keep finding niches. And it was exciting for me to be a part of this, and I had the opportunity to do many of my own meetings one-on-one with the countries around the world, with our commerce team there, and then I had the final day with the President going through these critical meetings. And you know, we are hitting it as hard, and with the President's leadership, I think very effectively about the kinds of things we need to do to take that further. I'm just going to stop there. I could give you statistics, you know them all, but mainly what I want to say is a big, big thanks to all of you for your support on the free trade agreements, your support in this area, and I appreciate your giving.
The administration, someone that I've known for a while, extremely successful in business, someone who has sacrificed, as many people do, to go into government. Took a lot longer to get his confirmation done than any of us would have wanted, but it is the times we live in this town that everything seems to take a little longer than the American people would like, and surely on things that we as the administration would like to get done. But it got done, and so we're extremely proud of John's hit the ground running at APEC last week, and he's leaving, I know, today after this meeting for China for the JCCT with a number of other colleagues from the administration. So as I introduced John the day he, after he was confirmed by the Senate, I said he has the opportunity to be the second greatest Commerce Secretary in the history of the country. So So I hope he takes advantage of that opportunity. So let me introduce to you John Bryson. John?
Well, really, I'm honored to be introduced by Bill. We actually spent a lot of time together out at APEC, but a lot of time every previous step along the way, and he did everything he could to move my confirmation along. It's just that I was a tough case.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's such a pleasure to work with Bill and work with the members of this administration, many of whom are around the table. So that I'm now 3 weeks into the job, so I'm really way into this. This is the fourth meeting. It's my first, but I'm really delighted to be with you. I think what you're doing makes a difference. It makes a huge difference, and I've been able to go through the letters of recommendations you're making, and they're practical and they're sound and the kinds of things that are based on what business people can offer, including a sense of urgency, including a really highly specific means of keeping track of what we're doing here, and I commend that a lot. Leaders of the business community and the labor community together, I think, are bringing in valuable insights. I'm very pleased that members of Congress are with us here as well, and I'd simply say that I and we count on your advice, and that's vitally important to us. I'm going to talk a little about exports, but I'm not going to go very far into what I might say because you know so much about it all already. Reality, as I say, from the day I've arrived at the Commerce Department, that we have a fragile economy in this country. It's moved forward some, but what we have beyond that is a jobs crisis. I mean, the levels of unemployment are really, really, really low. And notwithstanding the fact we have now 20 weeks in a row of improved jobs reports, and we were actually delighted. We're out at APEC, and we got the report on September. You know, it was a meaningful step up. Still way too little relative to what we need to have. And I've talked a lot. Some of you, we were talking around breakfast this morning, what this means for older people, for middle-aged people, but particularly for the young people that are potentially entering the workforce now and don't find anything, and what that does for the disciplines they need to have, but also their sense of opportunity in this country is something we've got deeply to address. So that's going to be your time to those of us in the federal government on this exports issue. Thank you very much.
John, thank you. Thank you very much for both the, for the encouragement and leadership. That's what really gets us up in the morning, and for recognition of some of the success that some of my colleagues have had in leading these initiatives. You mentioned the small business one, and I was just looking at Fred, Chairman Hochberg over there, and the Small Business Supplier Financing Initiative, which is a first big step in the direction you're encouraging, John, that just has rolled out, and we see it and are already working it with banks and with our supply base, and so you'll probably mention that a little bit later, but I acknowledge that. Ursula, do you have any comments before we charge ahead?
Just short. Welcome, Secretary Bryson. It's good to have you on board. You do have big shoes to fill. We've made a lot of progress, and I look forward to just making more with you at our side. So thank you for coming on board.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ursula. I think it's important to point out at this point, and believe it or not, we've been at this for 18 months, to look at where we are on implementing our first 15 letters of recommendations. Our output are letters to the President after working with you to make sure the wording is right and the recommendations make sense. And we actually went through a discussion at our last meeting where a few of the members said, hey, should we stop and look where we are and give ourselves a sense of completion of implementation, challenges yet in front of us against a number of the major areas. And the PEC staff has prepared a stoplight chart, which will help us briefly review the progress. I'll highlight a few, and then I'll turn to other members to perhaps make some comments. The best news I can report is that Ursula, Pat, Jim, and I did witness the historic signings of the FTAs with Korea, Colombia, and Panama last month. And so that recommendation is solid green, thanks to the leadership at the cabinet level here. On export control reform, I'm pleased to report that the administration has continued to make progress. I think we have a real opportunity here. After living through many, many years of not much progress there, I think Secretary Gates' initial initiative was very welcome, and we, in a meeting with Secretary Panetta yesterday, a subset of this group, very pleased to see his commitment to push through with your team, John, and with State to follow through on those recommendations. It did publish a draft rule for Category 8, rationalizing the controls on aircraft and aircraft parts and components. A great place to start, as far as I'm concerned. So, on XM, bills are ready for floor action and in the House and Senate next year with the administration's support. I think we're at a level that can support the exports, but it's not done yet. But we're all in, and we're going to try to engage everybody to help Chairman Hochberg get there. And on tax reform, there is a lot of work going on, but it's a little early to predict what's happening. I mean, it's all caught up in the budget thing. So, you know, before I ask Secretary Bryson to make some comments and Chairman Hochberg. Okay, welcome to the fourth meeting of the President's Export Council. We, like always, we have a lot of material, so let's get started. Listen, last week we made a lot of progress, and that's last week. And even prior to last week, we made a lot of progress on a number of fronts. But APEC, and I think Mike Froman later in the morning is going to give us an update on that meeting. Everything from FTAs to trade agreements to related things. A lot's going on out there. I also want to thank Rob Hendrickson and now Ambassador Bobby Mandel for their service to the Council. Rob is stepping down at the end of the year, and last month the Senate confirmed Bobby to be the U.S. Ambassador to Luxembourg. They have both made valuable contributions to the Council, as all of us remember, and they will be missed. Now, let's welcome my old friend Bill Daley, White House Chief of Staff, who will introduce our newest member, Commerce Secretary John Bryson.
Thanks, Jim. Old friend. Yeah, that's a good point.
One of us is old, Bill.
I look around, there's a lot of us. Anyways, let me thank Jim, and let me, once again, on behalf of the President, thank all of the members of the PEC for the time you take out of your busy schedules from your businesses, from your lives to help this country, help the economy, and to really spend time to give advice to us. And I thank all of the members of the Cabinet and the administrators that are here and all of the administration people who are here with you today. Obviously, a lot has happened. First, let me thank you all. A lot of very positive things have happened lately. The 3 trade agreements and TAA that was passed. I thank so many of the people in this room who worked awfully hard for those to be passed. Took a long time, a lot longer than any of us wanted, but I think in the end we're very pleased. It is going to increase jobs in this country. It's going to strengthen our relationship with allies that have been strong friends of the United States and give opportunities to American workers that have not been there. So we thank you for the work, and everyone in this room really, I know, spent a lot of time on it, and especially Jim as chairman of this group really spent a lot of time on it. So I thank you all for that. I know Froman is going to give an update on APEC. Let me just say your chairman did a wonderful imitation of Charlie Rose as he interviewed the president, and I think the APEC meeting was very successful. There is a strong desire by the president to focus and continue to strengthen the focus on Asia and the opportunities for engagement with friends throughout Asia. And I think the feeling at that meeting was very much positive about the U.S. engagement over the next number of years in Asia and the opportunities that present themselves there for U.S. businesses and for export growth. So I thank you, Jim, for that interview. I think the president did a great job of pointing out the opportunities that are there for us and the need for us to get more competitive here in this country and therefore be more competitive around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce a new member of